Hi, Akshaya. Thank you so much for joining me today. I am Chaitanya from Chine Books. And I would quickly like to give a shout out to HarperCollins India for putting together this interview as well as sending across this gorgeous copy of your book to me. So we are so glad to have you here. Tell us a little about yourself.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited. And yeah, so I actually was born in India. I grew up in Chennai for a
Wow.
few years before I moved. So getting to see this book out in India has like been such a lifelong dream for me, and I'm very, very thrilled to have HarperCollins India and meet so many great readers as well. But yeah, so I guess I can talk a little bit about, I guess, is there something specific that I should say?
No, that's it. And also, if you could tell us a little about your book, like what it's about, and what can readers who haven't yet discovered this for some reason, or who have, but they're still not sure whether they should be heading into this. So, what's the hook? Why should they pick this up?
Sure, yeah. So the book is set in a world that is inspired by ancient India. It is a young adult fantasy. And in this world, magic is a physical resource that is
Mhm.
mined, and they are running out of this resource. So, in order to get more, these four estranged royal siblings go on a treasure hunt quest to try and find more. So, it has some family drama, it has some adventures and puzzles and ciphers. There's a little bit of romance. Yeah.
Wow, wow. So, the moment the book came in my mail, I instantly picked it up, started right that moment, and just loved it as I went. And one of the things that I really found so interesting about this book was the fact that growing up, I did not really have books which really represented me in them. Like, sure, I had Harry Potter, Narnia. Those were great books, but necessarily they did not offer enough biracial or BIPOC or Indian characters for that matter. So, in that sense, could you speak a little about how important representation is in today's time, and specifically in the context that so many white readers or non-Indian, non-South Asian readers are also going to be picking up this book, and they would be exposed to this different sort of culture that that they don't see as often as we see theirs, the Western perspective, and at the same time how for Indian readers and for South Asian kids and audience, it's such a big win.
Yeah, so representation was something that was really important to me going in because, as you mentioned, it was not something that I had seen growing up.
Right.
And the first book that I really saw that was like a young adult fantasy, that was like a fun adventure with South Asian characters was Roshni Chakshi's The Star Touch Queen.
Mhm.
And that was seeing that book get published and get the reception that it did was actually what gave me the courage to write The Ivory Key and
Right.
feel like, oh, there is like an audience out there, or there are people who are going to be interested in picking up this book.
Right.
But up until that point, like that was 2016, that was quite recent. Up until that point, I had only written books with white characters. So it was honestly a mental shift for me too, to see that this was okay, that this was possible. And actually writing it though was incredibly joyful. I grew up in the US. I grew up in California for most of my life. And so a lot of the media that I was exposed to were Western media, full of white characters. And so that was a really big part of my, like, the stories that I loved growing up were things like National Treasure, Indiana Jones, you know? And
Right.
so I wanted to draw those influences too, like draw from those places as well. And the
Right.
things that shaped me as a storyteller, but then also get to infuse some of the cultural elements that I grew up with, that I was really familiar with. And that was kind of how I set out to write this book. So
Mhm.
it is very much like, okay, I drew from both the elements of my identity, like the
Right.
stories that I heard from my grandparents and my parents growing up, but also the stories that I was watching with friends and things like that.
Right. Right. I love that because, you know, there are those little things in the book. For example, the titles Rajkumar, Rajkumari, or, you know, the names of the objects, Talwar, Trishul, and all these different things that you see, you know, that you hear in Indian context. And in general, the world building that you've created for this book is so rich, and it has that essence of India. So I wanted to know if there was any sort of research that went into this while you were writing. Did you read other books? And if you did, then what were they? Or just the general process that went into writing this?
Oh my gosh, so much research. Considering that this book is not at all historical, it is purely fantasy. I did far more research than even I expected to do. And a lot of it was me just going through like academic articles on Gay Stalker and trying to find some like proof that something existed. I also did a lot
Right.
of like just general searching of like, when was this thing invented?
Mhm.
And then trying to say, does it make sense? I did not stick to a particular time period, but I kind of went anywhere from like technology wise, I would say like from the 1600s to the 1800s, somewhere in there.
Right.
And
Right.
then a lot of the other stuff that I researched were forts and the history of forts. And a lot of those were built like centuries earlier. So a lot of the
Mhm.
architecture is actually me pulling from like almost medieval India, maybe even a little bit earlier.
Right.
And then in terms of like the little like details and the cultural things, a lot of it was me just, you know, calling my
Right.
family
The
in India,
food,
calling
the
my grandma
festivals.
especially.
Yeah, the
I'm sorry?
food, the food, the festivals. Right.
Yes. Oh my gosh. The food was my favorite part to include actually, because like I'm South Indian, but I grew up eating a lot of food from a lot of different places. My mom is a really big foodie. So like growing up, she introduced me to a lot of regional cuisines.
Mhm.
So because of that, it was really important for me to not just have this like a single narrative of what Indian food or Indian culture is like,
Right.
and make sure that it represented like the regional diversity, because there's so much diversity within India in
Right.
so many different ways. You know, there's the diversity
Mhm.
of like festivals and food and clothes and religion, and all of those things were important to not overlook and have this like, this is what it is.
Right, right, right. Now, speaking a little about the characters, and as I can already see, the UK version has all of them,
Yes.
and so, you know, so while I was reading, it was really difficult to pick one because I kind of liked each one of them, and like, and I was sometimes I was agreeing with their decisions, sometimes I was like, wait, what are they doing? And then I later realized, oh, okay, that makes sense now. But one character that really stood out for me was Ronak. I really liked his fierce love for his brother, the need to protect him, the need to just be there for him and do anything. And I think that the same can also be said for all the other siblings on one level or the other. So I wanted to know, where did all of that siblinghood, the idea, because you know it is a complex family. There are just so many secrets. Every character is so layered, and as you proceed in the book, each of that starts peeling off, and you get to know why they are doing the things that they're doing. So where did all that comes from? And a part of that question can also be that it has four characters and four POVs. So how difficult was that to do?
So difficult. It was, I don't think I fully understood the challenge that I was setting for myself when I started. And at some point I was like, well, it's too late now. This is just a story. It actually specifically means a lot to me that you liked Ronak, because I think he is a harder character to love. I think it's easy to for people to really connect with Caleb, and I love Caleb so much. But it genuinely means a lot to me when people like Ronak, because he is a difficult character. He makes a lot of bad choices, and you're like, why are you doing this? But
Right.
a lot of it is driven by that love for his family and specifically for his brother. Um, I guess my idea for it was always about the sibling dynamic. Like that was always the idea that I had. And some of my big influences were like the Originals TV show, and like the idea
Right.
of having this like family, these siblings say always and forever, and having so much emphasis put on, I'm going to protect you, but then the thing that they're doing to protect their family
Right.
member.
Elijah always being there for Nicholas.
Yes. It's like it, yeah, and like, you know, Klaus literally putting a dagger in his siblings and carrying them around for, you know, hundreds of
Centuries.
years.
Yeah.
So that always like really spoke to me. But then on the other hand, my very, very original iteration of this idea was like kind of a Robin Hood retelling. And
Mhm.
you can still kind of see that in Ria's character, but it's a very
I
different
do.
book from
Mhm.
it.
Mhm.
Originally, I was thinking, oh, it would be kind of interesting if like my Robin Hood rebel character was stealing from somebody who was like a family member. I was like, how would that be like even more complex?
Right.
So I knew that that's really where I wanted to
Mhm.
take the story, and then the other siblings sort of came in after that.
Right. So, finally, once I finished this book, I was like, where is book two? I instantly went on Goodreads, checked when is the release date, and marked it so that, I get to know when it's coming out. So, what can you tell us? I know you cannot give us any spoilers, but like, what can we expect from book two?
That is a great question. I'm still working on it, so I can't say too much, but there's definitely more puzzles and adventures. There's more secret societies, a little bit more romance as well. Um, yeah, I guess that's all I can really say for right now.
Right. Right. So that was such a fun conversation, Akshay. Thank you so much for taking all the time to chat with me. I thank you on behalf of HarperCollins India as well. And
Thank you for
we,
having me. This was so fun.
yeah, we absolutely wish you the very best for the Ivory Key.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, great. Is there
Yes.
anything else?
No, I think that's it. Nisha, are you around?